The city buzzed beneath him, unaware, indifferent. From the top floor of H+ International's tower, Kyle Harrington stood still, holding an envelope with fingers that had once closed billion-dollar deals without flinching, now trembling. Everything about his life had always been sharp. Clean lines, clear margins, control. He was the kind of man who didn't forget dates or misplace passwords. The type who remembered interest rates off the top of his head and made decisions that turned stock markets. But this envelope, it didn't belong in his world. It had no sender, no return address, just his name, scribbled in rushed handwriting, smudged like it had been held too tightly by someone unsure of letting go. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he stared at it like it might explode, not because of fear, but because something in his gut shifted, a strange pull, a signal. He recognized it. He just didn't want to. His doorman had handed it to him without much thought. Dropped off about 10 minutes ago, he'd said. Lady wouldn't leave her name. A woman. Kyle's world rarely involved surprises. His calendar was managed down to the minute. Even his free time had structure. Nothing came unannounced. No one just showed up. So why now? He opened the envelope slowly, carefully, like someone peeling back years. Inside were 2 photos and a folded letter. Simple, innocent, devastating. The first photo made him sit down, not because he felt weak, but because standing felt impossible. 2 children, a little girl with soft curls and wide green eyes, a boy beside her wearing a crooked smile and a superhero cape made from what looked like an old bedsheet. Their faces glowed, not because of lighting or filters, but because they were alive in a way Kyle hadn't seen in years. A kind of joy that money couldn't imitate, a kind of presence that couldn't be faked. But that wasn't what left him breathless. It was the eyes. Those eyes were his. He blinked once, twice, looked again. It didn't change. The second photo, her, 5 years gone, but his memory had never let her go. Nariah Lane, the only thing in his carefully calculated life that hadn't come with a strategy. His chest felt tight. He unfolded the letter with the stiffness of someone afraid of what they'd find, yet needing to know. Dear KL, I never planned on reaching out. I wasn't sure if you'd even remember me. But our children, yes, children, have started asking about their father. They deserve to know who they came from. I'm not asking for anything, but they deserve the choice to know you, if you're willing. Nariah, children, not 1, 2, twins. It was only 4 sentences, but they hit with the force of years, lost ones. Kyle pressed the bridge of his nose, eyes burning in a way he couldn't reason with. He wasn't a man who cried, not for boardroom betrayals, not for missed holidays, not even for the father who raised him like an intern. But this was something else. He thought of her, Nariah, the bookstore owner with ink-stained fingers and a laugh that felt like truth. She had been different, not interested in his money, his name, his empire. She had once told him that peace wasn't something you earned. It was something you allowed. He hadn't understood it then. Maybe now he did. A memory flashed, a quiet porch, her head on his shoulder, stars above, silence that didn't need to be filled. He remembered the promise. I'll be back, he had said, fingertips brushing her cheek like it was fragile. He never came back. Before we continue, if you believe in second chances and the kind of love that finds its way even after years of silence, please like this video and subscribe. You might just find a piece of your own story in this one. Kyle stood up, not like a man who had just read a letter, but like one who had just been given a truth he couldn't ignore. He walked over to the window again. His reflection stared back, tailored, sharp, untouchable. Yet the only thing he could think about was whether those kids had ever celebrated a birthday with balloons, or had someone read them a bedtime story. He checked his phone. The next flight to North Carolina left in 3 hours. Kyle didn't pack much, just enough. He didn't call anyone to cancel meetings or alert his assistant. He didn't notify the board. He didn't explain. For the first time in years, he let silence carry him. No conference calls, no numbers, no deals to broker. just the hum of the car that took him to the airport, and the questions echoing louder than the city traffic he left behind. He stared out the jet's window, but he wasn't watching clouds. He was seeing her, Naraya. The last night they'd spent together had been quiet, simple, yet unforgettable. She'd made tea. They talked about everything and nothing. That night had felt like something new, something uncalculated. A beginning. He told himself later that his silence was kindness, that she deserved more than someone chained to 1,000 deadlines, that if he stayed away, she could be free to build a life unburdened by his world. He told himself it was noble. But now, it just felt like running. He'd told himself the chapter was closed. Now he realized it had never even been finished. The car ride from the airport to her neighborhood was quiet. Everything felt too slow, and yet not slow enough. The houses grew smaller, the skyline fading into trees and modest porches. He looked out at the unfamiliar, feeling stripped of every advantage he'd built his life around. He wasn't arriving as a CEO. He wasn't bringing gifts or power or influence. He was showing up with a name they didn't know, and a hope that they'd want to know it. He saw the address. The cottage was small, neat, with a winding path leading to the front door. Wildflowers bent with the breeze. A small wind chime rang softly from the porch. Kyle got out of the car and stared for a moment, his pulse loud in his ears. This wasn't a boardroom. There was no plan, no agenda, no armor. He stepped onto the path. The door opened before he could knock, and there she was, Naraya. She looked different, and yet exactly the same. Her hair was longer. There were faint lines near her eyes that hadn't been there before. But those eyes, they were still the same eyes that had looked at him without expectation, eyes that had once seen him, not his title, not his net worth, but him. She didn't speak at first, neither did he. Words didn't feel big enough. "You came," she said, voice almost afraid to believe it. "I got your letter," he replied, softer than he meant to be. A pause, a breath. "I didn't know if you would," she said. "I didn't know if I could afford not to." That's when they heard the footsteps inside. Quick, light, full of life. A small figure peeked around the edge of the door. The girl. A moment later, the boy. Luca. Kyle froze. They weren't just in the photo now. They were real. Breathing. Moving. Curious. Beautiful. Nova stepped forward first, holding a worn stuffed animal in one hand. She looked at her mother, then back at the tall man on the porch. "Mommy, who is that?" Kyle knelt, slowly, carefully. Like any sudden movement might break whatever delicate thread connected this moment. "My name is Kyle," he said gently. "What's yours?" "I'm Nova," she said, glancing up at her mother. Luca stepped beside her, chest puffed out with pretend bravery. "I'm Luca, and I can run really fast." Kyle smiled, the edges of his mouth unpracticed in this kind of warmth. "I bet you can." He looked at Naraya, eyes searching hers, asking permission, asking everything without saying it aloud. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Kyle hesitated, voice breaking before he could stop it. "I'm your dad." There it was. Spoken, real. No press release. No headlines, just a sentence that changed everything. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Nova stepped forward, without hesitation, without fear. She wrapped her small arms around Kyle's neck. A second later, Luca joined. Kyle held them both, unsure how his heart was beating through it all. He closed his eyes and breathed them in. Two little people who didn't care how many zeros were in his bank account. They just wanted to be held. And in that moment, Kyle realized something with absolute clarity. This wasn't a disruption. This was the beginning of everything he never knew he needed. There had been no GPS malfunction, no wrong turn. Kyle had simply kept driving. The business conference had ended earlier than planned, and for once, he hadn't booked a red-eye flight back to New York. He was exhausted, not from work, but from the weight of his life. The numbers, the strategy, the endless decisions. He needed stillness. So he drove, past the edges of the map he lived by, past signal towers and city limits, past anything that demanded something from him. That's how he found Oakbridge. It was barely a dot on the highway exit sign, nestled between worn-out farmland and sloping hills. There were no skyscrapers, no sirens, no surge of ambition in the air. Just a quiet stretch of road lined with modest homes, fading picket, fences, and front porches that seemed to whisper, "Stay a while." Kyle parked in front of a diner with a crooked open sign and stepped out of the car. The air carried a faint scent of warm bread and cedar, something honest. He ordered coffee, black, and sat by the window. No one recognized him. No one whispered. No one cared. That anonymity felt strange and freeing. As he stirred his coffee, his gaze drifted across the street. That's when he saw her. She stood outside a small bookstore with a faded teal awning, arranging a display of second-hand novels. A yellow notepad was tucked under her arm. Her movements were unhurried, thoughtful, like the world behind her didn't matter as much as the one inside the pages. She laughed suddenly at something a passing child had said, and Kyle found himself still. That laugh didn't chase attention. It simply existed, soft and full of light. Something about her felt grounded, like she belonged to this place, but not because she was stuck there, because she chose it. He didn't know what compelled him to cross the street. He rarely followed impulse, but he did. The bell above the bookstore door gave a gentle ring as he stepped inside. The scent of aged paper and cinnamon drifted toward him, warm and familiar. Wooden shelves curved along the walls, packed tightly with stories of every kind. "Hi there," she said, looking up from the counter. "Looking for anything special?" Kyle hesitated. "I'm not sure." Her smile widened. "Just a little." "Then you're in the right place." She had no idea who he was. That was clear, and for some reason, he didn't correct her. He didn't mention his company or his influence or his net worth. He didn't try to lead the conversation. He simply stood there. "I'm Naraya," she said, offering a hand. Kyle. Her handshake was firm but kind, grounded, real. He let his eyes wander for a moment. Walls of mismatched frames, a cat asleep on a sun-drenched chair, a handwritten quote on the chalkboard behind her. Some chapters aren't about the plot. They're about the pause. Naraya caught him reading. "I change the quote every week. It's silly, but I like it." "It's not silly," Kyle said. "It's the first thing that's made sense to me all month." That day turned into a second visit, then a third. Kyle didn't stay at a hotel. He found a bed and breakfast on the edge of town, run by a retired couple who baked too much and asked too little. Each morning he returned to the bookstore with no real plan, only a growing need to see her. Their conversations never felt forced. She told him about her favorite authors, the way she alphabetized shelves. Her dream of opening a second store one day with a coffee corner. He told her about nothing, and for the first time, that felt okay. She never pressed for details. She asked him about what he loved, not what he did. When he hesitated, she let the silence hold space instead of filling it with noise. Once, they sat on the floor behind the counter, organizing donated books. Their fingers brushed over the same spine. Kyle looked up. Her eyes met his. She didn't look away. They started walking in the evenings. Oakbridge wasn't a town with much nightlife, just quiet streets, porch lights, and the occasional porch swing squeak. But those walks were electric in their stillness. He learned her rhythms, how she paused when she thought, how her laughter curled around, the ends of her words, how her kindness wasn't performative. It was instinctive. One evening, the power flickered during a storm. The bookstore dimmed, and candles were lit. Naraya offered him tea by the reading nook. "I should probably head back," he murmured. "You don't have to," she replied, her voice low, honest. He sat down beside her. The fire crackled in the corner. They didn't speak for a while, just sat, close enough to feel the warmth between them. "I never expected to find this here," he admitted. "Find what?" "Peace." Naraya looked at him then. "Maybe you didn't find it. Maybe it found you." He hadn't planned on touching her face, but his hand moved on its own. Her skin was soft, cooler than the room around them. She leaned in, not quickly, but deliberately. The kiss wasn't urgent. It was patient, deep. It felt like the kind of connection that doesn't arrive often, but when it does, it shifts something. That night, he didn't return to the bed and breakfast. Do you believe some people come into our lives exactly when we need them? Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced a moment like this. Morning light spilled across the bookstore's hardwood floor, touching the edges of scattered novels and casting soft streaks across the front windows. Kyle lay awake on the worn couch in the back room, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the hum of stillness. Naria moved quietly in the small kitchen, her bare feet brushing the old rug as she poured water into a kettle. She didn't speak when he entered the room. She didn't need to. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, everything was still, like the world knew not to interrupt. "Sleep okay?" she asked gently. "I did," he said, voice rough from sleep. "I didn't realize how much I needed to." She handed him a mug, fingers brushing his. He held her gaze, trying to memorize the color in her eyes, the quiet strength in them. They sat at the table, surrounded by paperbacks and old coffee rings, speaking softly about things that didn't matter because what really mattered had already been shared the night before. Later, they walked. Oakbridge had a way of slowing everything down. There were no deadlines, just dirt roads that led to nowhere in particular, old trees that had stood for longer than memory, and the occasional wave from a passing neighbor. Kyle didn't talk much that day, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. He didn't want to speak things into the air that he couldn't promise to hold. Naria didn't ask. She never did. That was her grace. She let people arrive as they were, no pressure, no conditions. They ended up on a small wooden bridge overlooking a shallow stream. The water moved lazily, carrying fallen leaves and sunlight across smooth stones. "I used to come here to read," she said, leaning against the railing. "When I was younger, before the shop." Kyle studied her profile, the way her lips curved slightly, how her voice softened in reflection. "You ever think about leaving Oakbridge?" he asked. She nodded. "All the time. But I never do." "Why not?" "Because there's nothing I'm chasing. Not anymore." He envied that. Not the stillness, but the contentment. He had spent years running toward something, achievement, respect, legacy. Yet none of those things had ever wrapped around him the way this moment did. The sun began to sink, spilling gold across the water. Naria turned to him. "You'll have to go back soon." He didn't respond, not because he didn't hear her, but because the weight of that truth settled too quickly. That night was quieter than the last. They didn't talk about time or schedules or what would happen when he left. They didn't make promises. That was the kind of lie neither of them wanted. But when he kissed her again, it wasn't with hesitation. It was with something deeper, something unspoken but understood. They fell asleep on the couch again, her head resting on his chest, their fingers tangled. He left 2 mornings later, not because he wanted to, because life, his life, wasn't built to stay. There was an acquisition waiting, shareholders expecting his return. His assistant had sent 12 missed calls and a flagged calendar full of red. The world he had tried to escape for 3 days was now pounding on the door. Naria walked him to his car. The sun hadn't fully risen. Mist hung low over the road. She didn't cry. Neither did he. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For showing up," she said, "even if it wasn't forever." He wanted to say something then, something that would keep this moment alive, but no words felt true enough. So he just nodded. She reached up and pressed her lips to his cheek, a gesture that held more weight than any boardroom vow. "If you ever come back," she said, stepping away, "you won't need to explain anything." He opened the car door and paused. "I'll try," he said. "To come back," she smiled, not in hope, not in sadness, but in understanding. He drove off before she could fade from his mirror, and with that, Oakbridge became a memory, a perfect, unfinished one. He hadn't planned to return home early that day. His driver was waiting downstairs, but Kyle waved him off, said he'd walk. No umbrella, no phone call ahead, no assistant looping in the staff. Just silence as he stepped into the elevator and rode up 49 floors to the penthouse. The only place in the city that didn't feel like a deal waiting to happen. He keyed in, stepped inside, and was greeted by the usual stillness. No sound except the mechanical hum of the climate system. No scent of dinner, no laughter echoing from another room. Just glass, stone, and order. Exactly how he liked it. At least, he used to. The envelope was on the console table, plain white, slightly bent at the corners, as if someone had held it tightly before releasing it. "Dropped off 10 minutes ago, sir," his doorman had said. A woman. Didn't leave her name. Kyle hadn't thought much of it, until now. He walked toward it slowly, loosening his tie as he went. It wasn't addressed formally, just his name written in rushed script. Unfamiliar, yet not. His hands didn't shake when he opened company acquisition proposals worth billions. But they shook now, just slightly. Inside were 2 photographs, face down, and a folded piece of paper. He flipped the first photo over and froze. A little girl, soft, dark curls tied up haphazardly, green eyes wide with wonder. She stood in front of a tricycle, one hand holding a juice box, the other waving mid-laugh. He flipped the second. A boy this time. Same age, same bright eyes. A toy airplane in hand, sneakers covered in what looked like backyard dirt. That grin, uneven, full of mischief, unmistakably familiar. The air shifted around him. He stared at those 2 faces, time slowing, heart suddenly struggling to keep pace with the rest of his body. He saw himself, not just the eye color, the shape of the chin, the tilt of the brow. These weren't coincidences. They weren't possibilities. They were his. He didn't realize he was gripping the envelope until it crinkled in his palm. His mouth went dry. His pulse thudded in his ears. He hadn't breathed yet. Kyle unfolded the letter, the single sheet already worn at the edges, as if read many times before being handed over. "Dear Kale, I never planned on reaching out. I wasn't sure if you'd even remember me. But our children, yes, children, have started asking about their father. They deserve to know where they came from. I'm not asking for anything, but they deserve the truth. If you're willing, they should have the choice to know you. Naraya." He read it twice. Then again. Children, not child. Children. Twins. Kyle dropped into the nearest chair, as if someone had cut the strings holding him upright. His mind flooded instantly with questions, timelines, possibilities, what-ifs. But they all drowned under the heaviest question of all. Why didn't I go back? The answer hit like stone. Because it was easier not to. Because walking away was simpler than complicating his life with love, with vulnerability, with the unknown. Because after Oakbridge, he told himself that she deserved someone whose world didn't require calendar approval to breathe. And now that choice had left him staring at the faces of 2 small lives he had never met. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, letters still in one hand, photos in the other. 1,000 meetings, years of deals, years of avoiding emotion under the guise of focus, and none of it could prepare him for this. He poured a drink. Something aged, dark, expensive. The kind of thing meant for toasts and quiet triumphs. Tonight, it tasted like dust. Kyle sat in his office chair. The city stretched out behind him in streaks of gold and steel, yet all he could see were the faces of 2 children he had never met. The curve of their smiles, the echo of himself in their eyes. Guilt crept in, quiet and unrelenting. He hadn't left Oakbridge with bitterness. He hadn't left because she pushed him away. He left because ambition whispered louder than memory. Because he believed his world didn't have room for someone like Neria, for her warmth, her quiet life, her truth. But even as he moved forward, Tokyo, Berlin, Chicago, she was always there in the back of his mind, in the moments between meetings, when silence grew heavy. She was the what-if that never completely went away. And now, the weight of what that silence had cost him was crushing. He thought back to the last morning they spent together. Her leaning against the doorway, arms crossed loosely, eyes half guarded. She didn't ask him to stay, didn't beg for promises. She let him walk. He remembered the slight hesitation in his step, the way his hand hovered over the door handle. But he told himself It was for the best. Better to leave gently, he'd said to himself, as if there was such a thing. Kyle stood and walked to his bedroom. He opened a drawer in the nightstand he hadn't looked through in months. Beneath old receipts and forgotten cufflinks, he found it. A postcard from Oakbridge, one he had picked up but never sent. The front was faded now, a snapshot of the town square with its bakery, antique shop, and yes, her bookstore. The message on the back was barely a sentence. Still thinking about that weekend. Hope you're well. No signature, no follow-up, just cowardice in the form of restraint. He stared at it for a long time before setting it down. The ache wasn't just in the past. It was in the present. In the gap between the man he had become and the one those two children had never had the chance to know. He returned to his desk, pulled his phone out, opened his travel app. The next flight to North Carolina left in 4 hours. Kyle didn't even pack a suitcase. He threw together a carry-on, a button-up shirt, dark jeans, one pair of shoes, and the envelope. He paused at the front door. This wasn't a meeting. This wasn't about control or negotiation. This was him, walking towards something without knowing the outcome. He wasn't afraid of failure. He never had been. But this felt different. Because if he failed now, the cost wasn't financial. It was personal and permanent. The car ride to the airport felt longer than usual. The driver made small talk. Kyle didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark sky outside, wondering if they'd be asleep by now. The twins, if they knew how to read, if they had favorite books, if they asked about their father before bed. Did they even know his name? Did they ever say it out loud? He opened the envelope again, carefully, and studied the photos one more time. He could have looked away, could have filed it away as something he wasn't ready to deal with. But there was no going back. He had missed their first steps, first birthdays, first words. He wouldn't miss whatever came next. The plane landed just after sunrise. Kyle stepped onto the tarmac with no assistant, no entourage, no briefcase. Just a man with a past at his back, and something unknown waiting ahead. He rented the smallest car he could find. The roads winding through the hills of North Carolina were a far cry from the lanes of black glass and concrete he was used to. Here, trees bent lazily toward the road, their leaves catching light in shades his office windows never let in. He drove in silence, no music, no calls. The directions led him past diners opening their doors, joggers waving as they passed, mailboxes leaning slightly under the weight of morning deliveries. The further he drove, the more the tension in his chest built, not from stress, but from awareness. He was about to face what he had avoided for 5 years, and he was doing it with nothing to shield him. No boardroom table, no title, no leverage, just truth and maybe regret. He pulled up to a cottage tucked beneath a line of quiet trees. The path to the porch was lined with overgrown flowers that had bloomed without permission. The front door stood framed by ivy and sunlight, simple and open to whatever came its way. Kyle stayed seated for a moment. Inside that house was a woman who once looked at him like he was more than a name, and 2 children who had no reason to. He looked at his reflection in the side mirror. He barely recognized it. The tailored suit, the polished shoes, they felt like armor now. And he knew armor had no place here. He changed into the shirt and jeans he'd packed, left the watch in the glove compartment, then stepped out. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes as he walked up the path. He glanced at the wild garden, the wind chime, the front steps with chipped paint. It was far from the world he'd built, but it already felt more honest than anything that bore his name in New York. He reached the door, raised his hand, paused. He could still leave, walk back to the car, pretend this was just a strange dream with no letter, no twins, no consequence. But then he thought of them. Nova, Luca. He didn't know their voices, didn't know how they laughed, what made them cry, what dreams they chased when no one was watching. He didn't know what he had missed, but he was done running from it. He knocked. Kyle stood on the porch, his hand hovering over the door like it might burn him if he knocked too hard. The house in front of him was modest, with white wood siding and a porch swing that creaked slightly in the wind. The front yard was more wild than managed, full of scattered blooms and worn stepping stones leading nowhere in particular. It smelled of lavender, old wood, and something familiar that tugged at him unexpectedly. He raised his hand again, paused, and then knocked. 2 quick raps, then one more as if to steady himself. A few seconds passed. The door opened, and there she was, Naraya. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, really looked. The silence stretched out, not awkward, but heavy with the weight of years. Her hair was tied back, strands falling around her face. Her clothes were simple. She wore no makeup, no mask, just her. It was the same face that had lived in his memory since Oakbridge, only now it carried something else, a kind of weariness, but also strength. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said finally. "I wasn't sure I should," he replied, voice rougher than he intended. She stepped back, a silent invitation. He entered the small living room. It smelled like lemon cleaner and fresh bread. There were toys in the corner, a half-folded blanket draped over the arm of the couch. The walls held framed drawings, some clearly made by small, determined hands. Kyle stood in the middle of it all, unsure of what to say. "You look different," she said. He glanced down at his open collar and jeans. "I didn't think a suit would make sense here." "No," she said. "It wouldn't." He looked around again. "This is nice." "It's home," she said simply. There was another pause. "I got your letter," he said. "I know. You didn't leave a number. I wasn't sure you'd want to call." Kyle swallowed the sharp response that rose. Not out of anger, out of guilt. "You should have told me," he said. "I thought about it, for years, but by the time I could bring myself to write that letter, it felt like it was already too late." "It wasn't." Naraya crossed her arms. "Are you sure about that?" He didn't answer, because he wasn't. There was movement down the hall, the unmistakable shuffle of small feet on hardwood. Naraya turned her head. "They're awake." Kyle's chest tightened. This was the moment, the one that made his pulse rattle in his ears and the air in the room feel too thick. She glanced at him. "I didn't tell them who was coming. I didn't know if I could." He nodded. A small voice called from the hallway, "Mama." Naraya stepped toward the sound. "Come here, baby." 2 small figures emerged. The girl, Nova, came first, holding a plush animal by the arm. Her eyes were wide, taking in the tall man in the living room. Her brother followed, his hair sticking up on one side, still in his pajamas, dragging a toy truck by one wheel. Kyle couldn't move. They were real. Not a photo, not a letter. Real. Nova looked up at her mother. "Who's that?" Naraya hesitated. She looked at Kyle, then back at her daughter. Before she could speak, Kyle stepped forward. Slowly, carefully. "My name is Kyle," he said, crouching to their eye level. "What's your name?" "I'm Nova," she said shyly. "I'm Luca," the boy added, edging forward, curiosity taking over. Kyle smiled gently. "Nova. Luca. I have something important to tell you." He looked up at Naraya once more, waiting for her to stop him if she chose. She didn't. "I'm your dad." It came out softer than expected, not because he lacked confidence, but because the truth carried so much weight. There was silence. Nova blinked up at him. Her grip on the stuffed animal tightened. Luca tilted his head, like he was trying to solve a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Then, Nova took a step forward. She studied him for a moment longer, then reached out, not with a question, not with hesitation, but with instinct. She wrapped her arms around his neck. Kyle froze, just for a second, then wrapped his arms around her tiny frame. Luca followed, not to be left out. He wedged himself under Kyle's other arm, pushing in close, as if sensing he belonged there. Kyle closed his eyes. They didn't know the whole story. They didn't know what he had missed, what he'd failed to be. But they were holding him anyway, and somehow, that was everything. They stayed like that for longer than Kyle could measure. The twins clung to him without a word, their small frames pressing into his chest, their arms wrapped tightly around his neck and side. Something inside him, long buried under years of indifference and order, cracked wide open. He didn't realize how much he'd been holding back until now. Not just emotions, not just regret, but the simple, human need to be someone to someone. When they finally pulled away, Nova sat cross-legged on the floor beside him and studied his face with the seriousness of a scientist examining a specimen. "You don't look like a dad," she said. Kyle smiled. "What do dads look like?" She tilted her head. "I don't know. I just thought they'd be... Messiah." Luca burst out laughing. "He wears shiny shoes," the boy said, pointing. Kyle looked down, guilty. They giggled. It was the kind of laugh that came from the belly. Light, free, unburdened. The kind he hadn't heard in far too long. From the doorway, Nuria watched quietly. Her arms were folded, but her fingers rubbed lightly against her own wrist. A gesture Kyle remembered from Oakbridge. It meant she was unsure. He turned to her. "I didn't come here to disrupt anything," he said. "I didn't come to confuse them. I know. I just wanted to see them. And you." She nodded slowly. "They seem to know who you are." He looked at the twins again, now digging through a pile of blocks on the carpet, arguing over colors like it was a matter of national importance. "I didn't expect them to accept me this fast," Kyle admitted. "They don't know what it means yet," Nuria said, "but they feel things, strongly. If something's off, they'll shut down. If it feels safe, they'll open up." Kyle looked back at them. "And I feel safe to them. For now." He took that in without flinching. He didn't expect trust. He didn't come asking for forgiveness. But hearing it, so plainly, still stung. Nuria walked past him into the kitchen. "Are you hungry?" she asked over her shoulder. "I could eat," he said. She opened a cabinet, pulled out plates, and moved like someone used to managing everything alone. Kyle followed slowly, unsure of where to stand. "I can help." She looked at him, one eyebrow raised. "You know how to make sandwiches?" "I know how to follow directions." She handed him a butter knife. "Then, follow these." Lunch was peanut butter and jelly, grapes, and string cheese. Not what Kyle usually considered a meal, but it might have been the best thing he'd tasted in months. They sat at the small kitchen table, Nuria across from him, the twins on either side. "Do you live in a big house?" Nova asked, her mouth half full. Kyle nodded. "Pretty big, yeah." "Do you have toys?" "Not really. Unless you count stock reports." "What's that?" Luca asked. Kyle chuckled. "Something very boring. Trust me." They laughed again. The sound settled into him, softening everything sharp. He didn't belong here. Not yet. But he wasn't a stranger anymore. After lunch, Kyle helped Luca build a tower of blocks. It collapsed twice. The third time, it stayed up, barely. Luca beamed like he'd just won an award. Kyle raised his hand for a high five, and the boys slapped it with a grin. Nova sat in the corner, reading a picture book aloud. Her voice carried through the room, stumbling over the big words but determined. Nuria leaned against the hallway wall, arms folded again. Watching, always watching. Kyle met her eyes. She didn't smile, but she didn't turn away either. "If you made it this far, I need your help. Comment if this moment touched you. Your interaction helps these stories reach more people." By late afternoon, the twins were sprawled on the living room rug, tangled in a nap they claimed they didn't need. Kyle sat on the edge of the couch, one elbow resting on his knee, watching the rise and fall of their breathing. "I didn't expect them to be so open," he said quietly. "They're kids," Nuria replied from behind him. "They take people at face value until they have a reason not to." Kyle turned to face her. She stood in the doorway, arms now resting at her sides, eyes softer than they'd been earlier. "And me?" he asked. "Do you take me at face value?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped into the room and picked up a fallen blanket, draping it over Nova's legs. "You left," she said calmly. "You said you'd come back. You never did. I wanted to. For a long time I told myself I would, but everything got loud again. The company, the pressure, my family, it all demanded so much. and I kept thinking I'd go after the next deal, or after the next board vote. I convinced myself I was protecting you from it. And in protecting me, you erased yourself." Her voice didn't carry bitterness, but it didn't flinch either. She was telling the truth, and Kyle didn't argue. "I thought you moved on," he said. "I tried." She sat on the opposite end of the couch, the twins still asleep between them. "I waited for a while," she continued. "At first I told myself you were busy, that life got in the way, that maybe you'd call or write or show up." She paused. "And then I stopped waiting." Kyle leaned back. "You deserved better. They deserved a father." He swallowed hard. "I know." The room fell quiet again. But this time it wasn't heavy, just honest. "I didn't come here expecting to fix anything overnight," he said. "I didn't come with answers. I had to be here." Naria looked at him for a long time. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," she said. "But if you're here, you need to mean it. They won't understand excuses. They only understand presence." Kyle nodded slowly. "I can do presence. You'll need patience too. I have resources." "This isn't about resources, Kyle." He laughed under his breath. "I know." She studied him. "You've changed. I think they changed me the second I opened that envelope." He glanced down at the twins again. Nova's hand twitched in her sleep, her grip tightening around the plush animal. Luca's foot kicked slightly, still full of restless energy even in rest. "I missed everything," Kyle said. "But you showed up," Naraya replied. "I should have shown up sooner, but you're here now." She stood and walked to the kitchen, leaving the door between past and future slightly open. Kyle didn't follow. He stayed on the couch, his eyes never leaving the two tiny bodies on the floor. He had built an empire to keep control, and now the most meaningful thing in his life was something he couldn't manage with a title or budget. It would take time. Trust wasn't given back with a handshake or a shared memory, but something had started. Not with grand declarations, not with forgiveness sealed in a sentence, just with two little words: "I'm here." Kyle had faced merger negotiations that stretched for 16 hours without food. He'd stared down entire boards of skeptical investors. He once talked a hedge fund out of a collapse, with nothing but a whiteboard in his voice. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for breakfast with two 4-year-olds. He stood in the middle of Naraya's small kitchen, holding a spatula like it was foreign equipment. "What do you mean the pancakes are supposed to bubble?" he asked, staring at the runny, uneven batter sliding across the pan. Naraya, already dressed and tying Nova's hair into a ponytail at the kitchen table, didn't even look up. "When you see bubbles forming on top, that means it's ready to flip." He leaned over the pan. "Define bubbles." Nova giggled. "You're not good at this. Thank you for the honest feedback," he replied dryly. From across the table, Luca raised both hands in the air. "Mommy's pancakes are better." Kyle raised a brow. "I haven't even served them yet." "They smell funny," Luca said, wrinkling his nose. "They smell like ambition," Kyle muttered. The moment he tried flipping one, the half-cooked batter flopped onto the edge of the pan and onto the stove. He sighed. Naria didn't laugh, but her mouth curled slightly. Kyle wiped the edge of the counter. "I'm not used to being bad at things. That's because most things in your world don't involve syrup and chaos," she said. "That's accurate." She handed Nova a small clip for her hair. "You'll get better." "I used to think pancakes were simple." "They are. You're just overthinking them." The morning continued in that same unpredictable rhythm. Kyle spilled juice trying to pour 2 glasses at once. Luca insisted on wearing 1 red sock and 1 green one. Nova asked if he knew how to braid hair, to which Kyle responded with a confident yes, followed by a 10-minute crash course from Naraya when he almost tied a shoelace into her curls. And yet, something inside him felt more grounded than it had in years. He hadn't checked his phone once, didn't think about stock prices or press releases. His entire world was packed into this small kitchen, full of too much noise, sticky counters, and children who said whatever came into their minds without filter. It was imperfect, And it was exactly what he didn't know he needed. Later that day, Kyle and the twins walked to a nearby park. Nuria stayed behind to catch up on emails and laundry. The short walk felt like a full expedition. Luca insisted on bringing a plastic sword, and Nova carried a backpack full of crayons. At the playground, Kyle stood like a statue at first, watching them navigate the equipment, climb monkey bars, race down slides. "Don't you want to play with them?" asked another parent, a woman seated on a nearby bench. Kyle looked at her, confused. "Play?" She smiled kindly. "They're watching you." He turned. Nova was halfway up the climbing wall, eyes darting between him and the top of the structure. Luca stood at the bottom, waving his sword like a victory flag. "Come fight the dragon." Kyle walked toward them, removing his jacket as he went. 5 minutes later, he was crouched behind a play tunnel, holding a stick as a defense weapon, while Nova yelled that he had to climb to the top of the castle to rescue the Crayon Queen. He laughed, actually laughed, as Luca declared him the new king and threw mulch into the air like confetti. That evening, back at the cottage, Nuria was hanging laundry in the backyard when Kyle came outside. He looked tired, not from stress, but from activity. She handed him a clothespin. "You survived. I'm in negotiations with Luca to lower his bedtime by 10 minutes. She smiled. "Good luck." He stood beside her, watching her clip a shirt to the line. The sun was low, casting a pale amber light across the yard. A soft wind moved through the trees. "This is harder than I thought it would be," he said. She didn't respond immediately. "But it's better too," he added. Still, no response. He glanced over at her. "You don't have to trust me all at once. I'm not asking for that." She met his eyes. "I know you're trying. I see it. They see it. I just don't want to do more harm. You being here is healing some of it." Kyle looked down. "And the rest?" She clipped the last piece to the line and turned toward him fully. "The rest takes time." They stood like that for a moment, just two people, standing between what was and what could be. The days began to blur in quiet rhythms. Kyle stayed in a small rental home 5 minutes down the road. Nothing extravagant, just a simple 2-bedroom space with mismatched furniture and soft light in the morning. Every day he showed up, sometimes at breakfast, sometimes after lunch, always before bedtime. He brought coloring books, toy rockets. He brought himself, and every time, the twins rushed to the door like he'd been gone for weeks instead of hours. It was the kind of welcome he wasn't used to. Nuria watched from the edges. She watched him tie Nova's shoes, double knotting them with too much tension until she gently corrected him. She watched Luca crawl into his lap without being asked, handing him a book and declaring, "You do the voices now." She watched Kyle struggle, not with affection, but with pace. He wasn't used to pauses. He kept trying to lead like the moment was a meeting. But parenting didn't work that way. You didn't walk into a child's world and dictate it. You were invited. Slowly, gently, and to her surprise, he was learning, not perfectly, but sincerely. That night, after the twins had fallen asleep mid-cartoon, Nuria stepped out to the porch. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and let the evening quiet fold around her. Kyle joined her a few minutes later. He handed her a mug of tea. "Still warm." "You remembered," she said. "You used to drink it every night," he replied. They sat side by side on the porch swing. The kind of silence that sat between them now was not cold. It was careful, a silence built on shared memory and the ache of what was lost. "They asked if you're staying forever," Nuria said. Kyle looked down. "What did you say?" "I told them I didn't know." He nodded. "That's fair." She turned her head slightly toward him. "They're getting used to you. I don't take that lightly. You should know, they don't understand the idea of coming and going, not the way adults do. If you leave again, they'll feel it as loss, not distance." Kyle didn't respond right away. "I've cleared my schedule," he said. "Everything. My CO's stepping in for the next quarter. I told the board I need time off." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You told your board of directors that you need time off?" "I didn't explain why. Just told them it mattered more than numbers right now." She took a slow sip of her tea. "And they were okay with that?" "They didn't have a choice. He said it plainly, without pride. Naraya leaned back slightly, rocking the swing with her foot. I keep asking myself if I'm doing the right thing letting you in. I don't blame you. I've spent 5 years building stability, not just for them, for me. It took me a long time to feel solid again. Kyle looked at her, really looked. You feel like the strongest person I've ever met. She gave a soft breath of laughter. Strong doesn't mean unbreakable. He let the moment settle. I'm not trying to rush anything, he said. I know I missed the first chapter. I can't rewrite it, but I can show up for what comes next. She met his eyes. Words are easy. I know. Another pause. I just don't want them to grow up believing love only shows up when it's convenient. I don't want that either, he said. That's why I'm still here. The porch light buzzed softly above them. Somewhere in the trees, a wind moved gently through the branches. Kyle reached for the edge of the swing. Not her hand, just the wooden slat beside her. Close, not forcing anything. I still think about that night in Oakbridge, he said. The quiet, the shelves, the way you looked at me when you said goodbye. I knew you wouldn't come back. I told myself I would, but you didn't. No, he said. I didn't. He turned toward her slightly. If I had, would you have let me stay? Naraya stared out at the darkness for a long time before answering. I don't know, she whispered. But I would have known you tried. That stayed with him longer than anything else, she said. The next morning was slower than usual. Luca had woken up earlier than expected, dragging a blanket down the hallway, and flopping onto Kyle's chest, as if that was the natural order of things. Kyle didn't move, just wrapped an arm around the boy and let him settle. Nova followed soon after, not to be outdone. She climbed onto the couch beside them and leaned her head against Kyle's shoulder, thumb in her mouth, eyes still heavy with sleep. Naraya walked in to find all three of them in a quiet huddle, cartoons flickering soundlessly in the background. She stood in the doorway, something fragile pressing at the edge of her chest. It wasn't just seeing Kyle with them. It was seeing him still. Present, real. She wasn't sure what that did to her yet, but it did something. Later that evening, after a dinner Kyle helped cook, he'd finally mastered pancakes and graduated to pasta. The kids fell asleep on a blanket in the living room mid-story time. Naraya covered them gently, turning off the TV and dimming the lights. Kyle stood by the window, looking out at the backyard. Do they always fall asleep this fast? No, she said. You wore them out today. He chuckled quietly. Good. They wore me out too. She joined him by the window. The yard was still, the sky stretching out like a deep blue quilt overhead. Fireflies flickered faintly near the fence. They asked if you're going to stay the night, she said. I can stay nearby. They want to know what it means when you leave. Kyle didn't respond right away. He folded his arms, gaze fixed on the horizon. They're just starting to trust me, he said. And I'm scared I'll do something to break that. Then don't. Simple. Sharp. Honest. He turned to her. You make it sound easy. I know it isn't. But showing up is only the first step. The rest is the quiet part. The part you do when no one's clapping for you. Kyle looked at her, and for a moment, there was something in his eyes Naraya had seen since Oakbridge. Not confidence, not certainty, but something softer. Something open. I was so sure I had nothing to offer them, he said. But now I feel like I've never had anything more important to give. They don't need you to be important, she said. They just need you to be real. Kyle took a slow breath. I want that, he said. Not just with them, with you too. Naraya didn't move, but she didn't look away either. You left me once, she said. I did. I believed you. I know. And it hurt. I know. Another beat. But if I'm being honest, she continued, when I saw you at the door that day, part of me still wanted to open it. He looked down. You did. Yes, she whispered. I did. She reached for the doorframe beside her, anchoring herself. Kyle stepped closer. Not to touch her. Not to invade. Just to be near enough that if she reached back, he'd be there. He didn't speak. Neither did she. The space between them thinned. Not erased, but softer now, like something long frozen had begun to thaw. And then, Naraya's hand slid gently across the edge of his. It wasn't a grip. It wasn't a promise. It was permission. To stay. Later that night, Kyle sat outside on the porch alone. A light breeze moved through the trees. The stars were out in full. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in years, he wasn't trying to plan it. Not script it. Not control it. He just wanted to be part of it. Could you forgive someone who left, even if they came back with their whole heart? Let us know in the comments. Your story could help someone else. Kyle stood in the middle of the penthouse and realized for the first time it felt too big, too quiet, too distant from everything that now mattered. He looked out over the skyline one last time. It was breathtaking, cold, beautiful, untouched. He had chased this view for years, convinced that the higher he climbed, the more whole he'd feel. But now he saw it clearly. It wasn't the view that mattered. It was who you saw it with. The movers were efficient. They boxed up art pieces, disassembled furniture, and carefully wrapped glass in layers of protective film. Kyle gave away most of it. Paintings, sculptures, half the wardrobe he never wore. He kept what mattered, a few books, a framed photo of his mother, and a handmade drawing from Nova that read, "To Dad, you are cool." The penthouse echoed as he left it. Empty walls, polished floors, no laughter, no crayons under the table, no memories. It was never home. Not really. He found a brownstone on a tree-lined street near Central Park. Modest by his standards, but full of charm. Wooden steps, window boxes, a backyard just big enough for something to grow. He handed Naraya the keys without ceremony. "I want this to feel like ours," he said. "Not something I'm fitting you into." She walked through each room slowly, pausing in the kitchen, running her fingers along the edges of the sink, opening cabinets. "It feels like a beginning," she said softly. The kids adjusted faster than he expected. Nova claimed a sunlit corner of the living room for her books and drawings. Luca turned a hallway closet into his super-secret lab, which mostly consisted of flashlights and broken toys he insisted he could fix. Kyle bought bunk beds. Naraya painted the walls with the twins. Yellow for Nova, blue for Luca. He helped, though his painting skills were clearly not inherited by either child. They chose dinner menus as a team. On Mondays, it was Nova's favorite noodles. Wednesdays belonged to Luca's grilled cheese obsession. Fridays became family movie nights, with popcorn, messy floors, and no bedtime arguments won. They weren't seamless, but they were together. Kyle's mornings changed. No more 5 a.m. alarms or marathon briefings over coffee. Now it was breakfast duty, mismatched socks, lost hairbrushes, and tiny hands tugging at his sleeves. Naraya found a nearby community garden. She visited it twice before deciding to start her own patch in the brownstone's backyard. Kyle stood at the window one morning and watched her crouched among the soil, her hands dirty, her brow focused. She looked complete, like she wasn't borrowing space in someone else's life anymore, but building one that finally fit. At the office, the change didn't go unnoticed. Kyle arrived later, left earlier. He answered emails with fewer words. He delegated with more trust. His staff began whispering things in hallways they weren't sure how to phrase. He seems lighter, focused, but different, like he's still running the show, but not running from something anymore. The board asked questions at the next quarterly review. "Are you stepping back?" One of them asked. "I'm stepping in," Kyle replied. A few chuckled, unsure if it was a metaphor or a resignation. He clarified, "I'm not leaving. I'm just finally doing both parts of my life well." There were no objections, only nods. On Sundays, they took walks. The four of them would wander through Central Park, slow and aimless. Nova always wanted to stop by the same pond, where she insisted the turtles remembered her. Luca pretended every squirrel was a spy on a mission. Kyle played along, squinting into trees and whispering, "We're being watched with full commitment." Naraya walked beside him quietly most days, sometimes lacing her fingers with his when the twins ran ahead. They'd stop for hot pretzels or ice cream, sit on a bench, watch the city move around them. There was nothing urgent, no clock ticking, just presence. Kyle bought a small journal, not for appointments, not for meetings, just space. Every night, after the twins were asleep and the house had gone still, he wrote a few lines, things they said, a question Nova asked, a joke Luca told, a note about Naraya humming while brushing her hair. It wasn't for anyone else to read, just proof to himself that he was here, really here. At work, the transformation became more than rumor. Kyle called a leadership meeting that month and did something no one expected. He handed over the operational reins to his COO, permanently. "I'm not retiring," he said. "I'm just choosing where I lead from." He outlined a new role: strategic guidance, vision casting. He'd be available, involved, but not at the cost of his family. Some looked confused, a few skeptical, but the numbers didn't lie. The last quarter had shown increased productivity, higher morale, and a surprising uptick in long-term investor confidence. When Kyle left that meeting, he didn't take the elevator to the top floor. He walked outside, texted Naria, and asked if the kids wanted to help him plant basil. Later that afternoon, Nova knelt beside her mother in the backyard, her hands dirty, her cheeks smudged with specks of soil. She was trying to plant a marigold, poking it down into the soft earth with a mix of precision and imagination. "What's this flower for?" she asked. "Marigolds bring warmth," Naraya said. "Can I put it near the tomatoes so they stay happy?" Naraya smiled. "That's a perfect idea." Kyle watched from the back steps, Luca beside him drawing something with sidewalk chalk. "Is it weird that I like dirt now?" he asked. Kyle smiled. "Nope, dirt is good. Dirt means things are growing." Dinner that night was eaten on the back patio. Paper plates, lemonade in plastic cups, music playing from a small speaker. Nothing fancy, nothing for show. Nova insisted they go around the table and say one awesome thing from the day. Kyle said the marigold near the tomatoes. Luca said the squirrel in the park who definitely winked at him. Naraya just looked around at the table, nodded once, and said, "This." Kyle glanced at her. No big moment, no dramatic pause, just a quiet truth that sat between them. Weeks passed. The city no longer felt like a backdrop for Kyle's ambition. It was becoming a canvas for something quieter, something more lasting. He walked the twins to preschool most mornings. It became a ritual, Nova demanding to wear her favorite purple jacket, Luca stopping to collect rocks he insisted were rare minerals. At drop-off, they hugged him like they meant it. Every time. Kyle noticed things now. The way Luca squinted when he was thinking. How Nova pressed her lips together when trying not to cry. The tiny details. The kind of things you miss when life is measured only by productivity. He no longer missed them. Naria opened a small pop-up book exchange in the neighborhood. It was her idea. A single bookshelf outside a local coffee shop with a sign that read, "Take one, leave one." A few parents stopped. Then, a few more. Kyle helped her install a second shelf the following weekend. She didn't call it a business. She called it joy. One Saturday, he took the twins to the office, just for an hour. He showed them the floor where the big decisions used to be made. Let them spin in leather chairs, draw on the whiteboard, eat cookies from the executive lounge fridge. "This is where you used to live?" Luca asked, eyes wide. Kyle knelt beside him. "It used to feel that way." Nova looked at the long hallway lined with glass offices. "It's kind of quiet." Kyle nodded. "It's better when it's noisy, right?" She nodded back. They left 10 minutes later. He didn't take anything with him. At home that night, Kyle found Naria in the backyard, her hands in the soil again. She'd cleared space for a small herb garden, basil, mint, rosemary. The plants were still young, but the bed was neat, intentional. "You're building something," he said, watching from the doorway. She didn't look up. "So are you." He stepped onto the porch. "Do you miss Oakbridge?" "Sometimes," she said. "But this feels like forward." He sat beside her on the steps. The kids were inside, laughing at something on a show neither of them could hear. Kyle looked at her. I used to think success was about building something no one else could touch. And now? He glanced toward the window, where Luca's shadow danced on the curtain. Now, I think it's about building something they can belong to. Naraya's hand found his again. No tension, no doubt, just stillness. Later that week, Kyle met with his board and finalized the restructure. His role officially shifted. Less hands-on, more mentorship, not a retreat, just a redefinition. He left the meeting without looking back. He had another promise to keep. That evening, he picked the twins up early. He brought them to the bakery. They chose cookies shaped like stars, sticky fingers, crumbs everywhere. Naraya joined them later, brushing flour from her sleeve, laughing as Luca described. His theory that the moon controlled people, moods, as well as ocean waves. Kyle didn't interrupt. He just watched her, watched them, watched the life he'd nearly missed, and gave thanks for second chances, for new chapters, and for the kind of love that doesn't ask to be earned, only received. The road back to Oakbridge was familiar in a way that made Kyle's chest ache. The trees lining the highway seemed taller than he remembered. The signs looked older, a little faded around the edges, but the air was the same, still, open, and honest. Nova sat in the back seat, her forehead pressed to the window, counting fence posts. Luca hummed quietly to himself, already bored, occasionally asking if they were there yet every few miles. Nuria leaned her head back against the seat, her eyes closed, a faint smile on her lips. Kyle glanced at her. You okay? Yeah, she said, just remembering. He reached over and took her hand. She didn't let go. They arrived just after noon. Main Street hadn't changed much. The corner diner still had the same menu painted on the window. A new shop had opened where the dry cleaner used to be. But the rhythm of the town was the same. Slow, present, unhurried. Kyle parked in front of the bookstore. It looked untouched. The paint on the door slightly chipped, the sign still swinging softly above the entrance. He could almost hear the bell waiting to greet them. Naraya stepped out first. She stood still for a moment, taking it in. It's smaller than I remember, she said. Kyle joined her. You were younger then. We both were. He looked at her. You still feel the same? She turned her head, eyes narrowed teasingly. That's not how aging works. It is when you look at someone every day and still want more. Naraya smiled, but didn't reply. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small key, the one she had kept all these years. She handed it to Kyle. You open it. He paused. Are you sure? She nodded. It's your turn to return. He stepped up to the door and slid the key in. The lock clicked open. The smell hit first. Old paper, wood, a faint trace of dust and something like cinnamon, exactly as he remembered. The bookstore was dim, but sunlight spilled in through the upper windows. Stacks of books lined every wall, and the counter still had the dent he left leaning against it all those years ago. Nova stepped in, wide-eyed. Did you live here? Naraya laughed. Not exactly. This place smells like stories, Luca said, nose crinkling. Kyle walked to the back, toward the reading nook with the worn leather chair. It looked smaller now, but no less sacred. He sat, just for a moment. His hand brushed over the wooden armrest, and for a brief second he saw himself again, tired, guarded, unsure. Then he looked up, and saw them, the children, the woman, the new chapter, the next heartbeat of his life. Naraya walked the shelves slowly, running her fingers over the spines of familiar titles. Some books had notes still tucked in their pages, recommendations scribbled in her handwriting. She paused at one shelf near the register. Kyle came to stand beside her. I used to stand here and watch you, she said. The day you walked in, I thought, this man doesn't belong here. He raised an eyebrow. Thank you. But, she continued, you stayed, and I thought maybe I was wrong. You weren't wrong, Kyle said. I didn't belong, but I wanted to. Now you do. They stood there a moment longer, wrapped in stillness. Not silence, stillness. Kyle reached out, gently tucking a stray curl behind her ear. She leaned into his hand. The years melted in that gesture. The pauses, the missteps, the lost time, and the future, now stretching before them. Not perfect, not predictable, but whole. The breeze carried the scent of leaves and sun-warmed earth as they stepped out behind the bookstore. The backyard had once been Naraya's private little world, where she sipped coffee between customers and read manuscripts before ordering. Now it echoed with the sounds of children. Nova and Luca chased each other beneath the tall trees, leaves tumbling around them like confetti. Their laughter was pure and full, the kind that didn't come from toys or screens, but from being seen, from belonging. Kyle stood near the edge of the yard, his hands in his pockets, taking it all in. Naraya sat on the back steps, a notebook in her lap. She wasn't writing, not yet, just watching, observing the kind of life she once thought was out of reach. He turned to her. "Do you think they'll remember this?" She didn't look away from the twins. "Not every detail, but they'll remember how it felt. How does it feel to you?" She looked up, like we made it back without a map. Later, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, they gathered inside the shop again. Naraya dusted off the counter. The twins sat cross-legged in the reading nook, flipping through worn picture books. Kyle crouched beside them. "Hey," he said gently, "do you know this is where your mom and I met?" Nova smiled. "Did she like you back then?" Kyle laughed. "I think she wasn't sure. She likes you now," Luca said, matter of fact. He looked up at Naraya, who had paused in the middle of shelving a book. "Yeah," Kyle said softly. "I think she does." As night settled over Oakbridge, Kyle stepped outside alone for a moment. The sky was darker here, deeper. Stars blinked above rooftops like quiet sentinels. In the distance, the town lay still, unhurried by ambition, untouched by urgency. He took a deep breath. This wasn't his empire. It wasn't lined with suits or guarded by security, but it held something he never thought he'd find again. A place that didn't demand perfection. A family that didn't ask for apology. Only effort. A woman who looked at him and saw the man beneath the title. Inside, Naraya watched him from the doorway. "You always stand like that when you're thinking." He turned. "Like what?" Shoulders a little tense, jaw set, hands still. "I guess I'm still learning how to relax. You're getting better." He smiled. "I had good teachers." She walked down the steps, standing beside him. "I used to think full circle meant ending up right where you started. And now? Now I think it means coming back, wiser, more open, more willing." Kyle looked down at her. "More in love." She didn't answer with words. She kissed him, slowly, fully, with every moment between them folded into one quiet promise. The next morning, before heading back to the city, they took one last walk through the town. Kyle held Naraya's hand. The twins ran ahead, kicking leaves, giggling, stopping to point out everything they found interesting. He didn't rush them, didn't correct them, didn't glance at his phone once. He was present, completely. At one point, Nova picked up a perfect red leaf and handed it to him. "For your book," she said. "What book?" "The one you write in every night." He smiled. "Thank you." He tucked the leaf into his pocket, knowing it would find its place between pages. A small reminder of the moment his life finally made sense. Not all journeys end with fanfare. Some just lead us home, not to a place, but to a truth we'd forgotten. Kyle Harrington began as a man who believed control was power, that success was separation, that love was optional, even dangerous, but love had other plans. Not flashy, not forced, just quiet knock after knock on the walls around his heart until he opened the door. And what stood waiting wasn't a threat. It was family. He learned that being strong isn't always about standing alone. Sometimes it's about kneeling down to tie a child's shoe, about apologizing without knowing if you'll be forgiven, about showing up again and again until presence becomes trust. Naraya taught him that wounds can close, that people can choose you again, even after silence. That love doesn't always come at the beginning of the story. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it returns when you're ready to receive it. And the twins, Nova and Luca, They taught him how to laugh without performance, how to hold still long enough to hear what matters, how to trade boardroom dominance for bedtime giggles and late-night why questions. He didn't lose who he was. He became more, not a different man, but a fuller one. Because the real title that mattered in the end wasn't CEO, it was Dad. If you've ever been scared to reach out, if you've ever walked away from something real, thinking it was the right thing, if you've ever wondered whether a closed door could open again, this story was for you. We don't always get second chances, but when they come, may we be brave enough to answer. If this story touched you, helped you breathe a little deeper, or reminded you of something worth holding on to, share it. Like, comment, and subscribe. Someone out there might be waiting for their full circle too.